Thank you very much for inviting me here, TAFCON. Particularly thank you to Mustafa Njai. Just to let you know, I used to be the principal of Marina International here in the Gambia. I lived here with my children, and my late husband was a senior lecturer at the University of the Gambia and was setting up a new department. So I'm part Gambian in that sense. Also, before I forget, I need to thank some other people who you will know of who have helped me to actually be here and talk to you today about investing in the human capital of the Gambia, which is about education and training in the Gambia. Firstly, my partner here, she was then the executive director of GALE, Gambia Africa Institute of Leadership, Mrs. Adelaide Sauce, who is a long-time associate and friend of myself. In the UK, I have been working with Dr. Momadou Salah of Global Hands, and he was he reached the accolade of the most innovative and best teacher in the UK. He was won that award in 2015. And the other person is Dr. Jibril Fall, who I believe has been doing work with the Gambian government here and organising the diaspora and mobilising the diaspora, and particularly the UK. So I come and I speak to you here not just as somebody who's just got some ideas, but someone who has been listening and talking to various people, both in the Gambia and outside of the Gambia. We came up with this idea called education, not for poverty reduction, not for quality, but education for wealth. It was an idea that we have been proposing through our partners. We have spoken in Nigeria, we have been to Kenya, but where it started was actually in the Gambia. We came here, our team from Aspire, and we spoke with and we listened to you. We went to ministers, we went to GCTI, Gambia Chamber of Commerce, we spoke with Mr. Njai, we spoke with teachers, we spoke with women, and we spoke and listened to young people. To hear for them, what is the kind of education that they want for the Gambia to move forward? And what does wealth actually mean for them? Does it mean the number of billionaires that are in a country? Does it mean the GDP? Does it mean whether you have oil or resources? Or is wealth more about the human capital of the country, the education, the well-being, and the health of its people? Does it mean about the transmission and preservation of its culture through the generations? And does it mean about the sustainable development of its land, its waters, and its industries? So we came with a very holistic view, and we were listening to see what it is that people thought. We then, after we left here, we went and we organised a high-level roundtable with some of the most brightest minds and loyal hearts in the Gambia that were residing in the UK. And we organised this at the Houses of Parliament. So we captured what we listened to here, we've captured what we've listened to in the UK, and we are putting this together as a final report, Education for Wealth, a roadmap, which we will be launching in February. So us coming back here is actually part of that process to give you a no surprises and a heads up on some of the things that we've found. Right. Now I'm going to say some things that perhaps are not as easy to say. If I had looked at the statistics of where the Gambia were in terms of its debt distress, in terms of poverty, I probably wouldn't have come up with education for wealth. But because I absolutely believe in the people, particularly in Africa, to solve their own problems, and having lived in the Gambia and seen that the Gambians punch far above their weight in terms of international agencies and institutions and here. I mean, we have an example here, Chernobyl in Rwanda, we have Denjai, who was at the UN, we have Ole Wadadiba, who's at World Bank. We have many Gambians in key positions in United Nations and international agencies. So we know that the capacity is here. But how is the country actually helping to develop all its people? And one of the key things I realized from being the head of Marina International, that the Marina International, the SEBEX, the YS, the Nigerian international schools, they are not enough for the people. This will only perpetuate an elitist type of institutions. And to develop the whole of the country, we have to look at the basis. One of the things I know in the Gambia, you have done very well in terms of education enrollment of girls. You know, in terms of they are lifted up. But when we see how girls actually are progressing in school, whether they maintain in school, it's a disaster. In terms of the regions, the disparities are huge. So you really must, and the Gambia must continue to focus on the education of girls. I believe this is a priority. Also, another thing that was coming up from speaking with the women, with young people and teachers, is that we need to rebrand the whole notion of education, of teachers. Very few people actually want to be teachers. That's a fact. Yep. We need to rebrand the teaching professions because teachers, I mean, when I see how Mrs. Adelaide Saucer is held in such deep regard by people because she was their teacher. And when I speak to young teachers, I spoke to teachers from every single region. They all happened to be in the hotel where I was staying, so it was marvelous. I could actually speak to male and female teachers in all 6 regions. They told me that girls and young do not want to marry teachers. They're not seen as somebody that is, up there. So we need to rebrand the teaching profession in terms of what they represent for the development of the country. They are helping to produce the future leaders, the future business people. Another thing that the young people told me when I spoke to them, they are very wary of foreign interventions. They are wary of gifts that come in from the outside if they do not have the Gambians at heart. And so therefore, they are also watching and waiting and willing to hold accountable anybody in terms of the National Development Plan and in terms of the government. Remember, these young people have grown up under a former authoritarian rule. They are not afraid. And so whatever the National Development Plan does in terms of empowerment of young people, in terms of education, it must be able to harness and speak to young people and harness their dynamism because they are the future. The median age of the Gambian is 17 years. And I'm so happy to hear that, for instance, in TAF's organization, that he is bringing on the young people. Legacy is key. And we, as the elders, I am in the 4th quarter. We, as the elders, we cannot just leave everything to the young people. We must set examples through ethical leadership. We must walk the talk in education, in finance. We owe it to the next generation. And for that reason, Aspire, we've invested to come here to finance the first phase of the Education for Wealth in terms of the consultations that we did here, in terms of the consultations that we did in the UK. And I brought one of my younger leaders here, Brandon, stand up. I brought one of my young leaders here so that he can hold me accountable when I go back. So he can hear what it is we've said. But basically, education is key. Education, 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 and drawing on the endogenous resources of the country, not only from what is coming from outside. And I know I've only got 29 seconds, but I've got to end with an example. And you won't hear it in many of the international organizations because they don't talk about it. Cuba. My parents come from Jamaica. So we're from the Caribbean. Cuba's education and healthcare system is the envy of the world. It spends 12% of its. It spends 12% of its government revenue on education, which is one of the highest in the world. It has celebrated in the last 50 years being 100% literate. In 1961, they embarked on the world's most ambitious literacy program, and in 1 year, they made 1 million Cubans literate. 1 year. No EU money, no foreign money. They mobilized their whole country, and many Africans have sent their people to go and study in Cuba. Their education is free from the bottom to the top. The children work on school farms to feed them. Toiletries are free. Uniform is free, shoes are free, and the young people who are working on the farms get a stipend. I wanted to say this because it is possible. A small country can do miracles, but you have to have, as people have said before, visionary leadership. So I leave it there. Thank you very much.
Thank